currently. And this bill seeks to have a devolution of powers national regard, and more specific speaks about rail as well as policing. What are your view of this? Because the ANC says basically now this is merely just a DA trying to make sure it or run the Western Cape as if it is own party way or own country rather, and then the ANC or the DA then says, but no, we're only trying to save South Africa from the ruins of the ANC. What's your view on this particular thing?
No, thank you very much. Firstly, for the opportunity. Look, firstly, it's most certainly a DA gimmick. You are correct. That is the ANC view. We believe it's a cheap electioneering stunt. Firstly, just at the level of reality. The DA are pushing this bill at the level of the provincial legislature. Now, even if the legislature passes the bill, it then still has to go to the National Assembly and get a 2/3 majority because it requires a constitutional amendment, which will not happen. The ANC will not support the bill nationally. The EFF will not support the bill. So it's a cheap electioneering stunt, wasting taxpayers' money, because when you put a bill like this through the legislature, you've got to have public hearings. We know what is spent on public hearings. You've got to employ legal advisors, because let me also tell you, the bill has been rubbished and rejected by the DA-run legislature's own legal advisory team. Advocate Maasdorp said that the bill is not worth the paper that it's written on. It doesn't pass any legal muster. It seems as if it was just written somewhere, some DA party political hack with no legal background whatsoever has crafted this thing purely for cheap electioneering stunts, to say to the electorate, now you know what, we want the Western Cape to be better than the rest of the country, and we're going to, and if you vote for us, you'll be able to implement this bill. Whereas even if the DA does win the elections in the Western Cape and have a 50% majority, it is still not going to be able to have this particular bill implemented, because it's going to have to go to the national level. Even if it has a moon pact, because the DA is not talking about winning elections nationally, it's looking at a moon pact. So even in the moon pact, because with the moon pact you are going to have, it's going to be a coalition. That coalition is also not going to have a 2/3 to amend aspects of the constitution. So it's neither here nor there. That's even outside of looking at the substantive issues. Now going into the substantive issues. It speaks about the devolution of certain functions. Now, it wants a devolution of rail or of transport and policing. But have we asked the question, what has the DA in the province done around health and education, which the constitution empowers provincial government to have full powers over, outside of the policy framework? Outside of determining policy. They've failed. We're sitting here today, your radio station, Eersterivier Radio, I'm getting calls till now from parents in Eersterivier whose children are still unplaced for next year. It cannot even deal with the issue of placing learners, something as basic as that. Hospitals. We don't have enough hospitals in the province. We have a closure of GF Jooste Hospital in Manenberg. Up until now, that hospital was closed in the DA's first term of administration when Helen Zille became Premier and Tiens Botha was the MEC. Up until now, we're now under the leadership of Alan Windey. There's still no alternative to GF Jooste. We're still waiting for Klipfontein Hospital to be spoken about even. So even those competencies that have already been provided for, they're not really functioning optimally in that regard. They're only servicing a few people. And even this thing about policing and transport. What has the DA administration done in community safety? They've not even been able to work. In fact, it's more of an antagonistic relationship with SAPS, and that feeds into about demonizing SAPS, competition with SAPS, fighting SAPs as opposed to assisting SAPs, number one? What has community safety done in terms of its own powers to build safer communities? Are CPFs being given sufficient support? Are communities being made to form part and parcel of crime fighting as we had during the time of Bambanani, when Premier Rasool was the Premier of the Western Cape? No. In fact, Bambanani was broken down completely when the DA took over, and Bambanani didn't require any national to have some competency that national has. The provincial competencies are not in itself being fully. They're not functioning optimally to implement provincial competencies. We come now to transport. We're just coming out of a taxi strike at the moment. Yes, I'm no spokesperson. The ANC is no spokesperson of the taxi industry. There are extremely rogue elements in the taxi industry, extremely rogue elements, capitalizing and abusing our people's vulnerability. However, we have to admit that the actions of the city of Cape Town and JP Smith in particular contributed very much to the crisis we saw. The lack of support for the taxi industry. When you find that at the provincial level, there were some moves with red dot and blue dot under MEC Madikizela to regulate while incentivizing, those were immediately cut by the province. And you have a province that allows a city to do as it pleases.
Regarding Democratic Alliance, or the Premier of the Western Cape said he engaged national government to also help fund their particular two programs. National government said no, there's no funding, and that's why they actually ended off their particular program. So isn't this a failure on both sides of national and provincial governments then?
Look, remember, red dot and blue dot program, it's supposed to come from a provincial budget. National gives the budget. You cannot run to national every time when you have a specific tailor-made program and say, no, national fund. Manage your resources that you have, which they have not. Instead, what has the Department of, now it's called Mobility, done? What did the Premier do? Utilize resources to change names of the department. That resource could have been used for blue dot and red dot. But you use the resources to change the name because you've got some epiphany that you must change the name of a department. Right? Number two, utilizing the resources to fight legal battles. Because you've got, for example, currently the head of traffic in the province who's facing allegations of sexual harassment. What does the department do? With the full knowledge of Premier Windy, utilize resources of the state, of the department, to defend this particular individual. So this is what's happening.
Okay, so I do know this spoke of both the rail as well as safety in the province. I want to quickly just ask one question on both safety or crime and as well as on the railway system. So with the recent increase, or the last reporting period showed an increase within crime, both murder and all those types of things. So doesn't that then show the incompetence, or rather the inefficiency of the national minister to actually deal effectively with crime? And then doesn't it also provide more clearer pathways for provincial or even local government to come in and take over that particular responsibilities from national government?
No, thank you very much. That's a good question. Look, I think firstly, that is why I set out originally the realistic aspect here. And theoretically, we are not in competition. National and provincial and local government ought not to be in competition. We are one government with different spheres. We do not, and this is why this bill is so dangerous, because it puts this competition going. It creates a competition. It seeks to balkanize the Western Cape as this special outpost for a certain select few people. We're not supposed to be in competition. The Constitution provides for provision for cooperative governance. We have what we call cooperative governance. So yes, let me firstly go on the onset and say that we are not necessarily saying that the national minister, in terms of his performance, has covered himself in glory. We can be highly critical of the manner in which SAPs have been doing things. There are inefficiencies at various police stations, and accountability must take place there. The DA are official opposition in Parliament nationally. They must hold. We will also hold our own public representatives accountable. But that does not mean necessarily that you break down the system. There's a reason as to why provinces are empowered to do police oversight and not to actually be the police themselves. There's a reason as to why provinces have to empower and work on developing safer communities and work hand in hand with SAP. So it's not necessarily to say, because I can easily turn around and say, no, the reasons as to why we've had the rise in crime in the Western Cape is because the socio-economic conditions are completely ignored. The Western Cape government totally ignores improving and building safer communities. I can easily say that, but I'm not playing that game. We are saying, let's have a whole, as Premier Windy talks about, let's have a whole society approach where everybody works hand in hand. Local government. The city of Cape Town has got LEAP officers already. LEAP officers are playing their role that they ought to be playing. So each sphere has its role to play.
On the issue of rail now currently, so we saw during COVID-19 whole destruction of some of our corridors and most of the rail corridors, specifically in Cape Town and across the country as well. Do you believe that, first of all, that this was a organized mafia group and it was involved in the destruction of a railway system? When can we expect the full implementation of the railway system? And once more, don't you think because of the failures once more of national government, it then also gives more better, it should be a better place for national or for provincial or local government to then take over the reins from national government when it comes to railway systems or even transport in general?
No, not necessarily. Again, city government or local government as well as provincial government has got its responsibilities, again, to cooperate with national government. The issue that we have here is, again, they've not been able to cooperate sufficiently. Instead, it wants to have a competition. And that's the problem. And we are not saying, again, I'm not saying that national government is not to blame in terms of taking action, in terms of building the efficient, but you need an entire cooperative approach. Because, for example, when you're looking even at a rail system, you've got to engage with local government in order to talk about the land availability. You've got to talk to provincial government about the use of, about what role does community safety play in providing resources to CPFs and communities to be ears and eyes of police.
Yes.
When it comes to guarding. So there's it's an integrated approach. The province and the city had a good idea with the My City program. But where does My City drive through? Does My City really service poor and working class communities? And that's already, let's not even go there. And they've already got the power to do so, but they don't do so. Now you want to get powers around rail. Who says they are going to properly do what they should be doing if they are given that particular powers? In fact, let me indicate, when we govern the province as the ANC just around transport, within our powers, we ensured that the tension between the taxi and the bus industry was at least minimized, because you had taxis being subsidized to take people to the buses when they were not on the same route, for example. You had even there was a plan for the Klipfontein corridor, where there was going to be kind of like what you have, like a My City going through that particular corridor. What did the DA do when they took over the city of Cape Town and the province? Yes, they do My City, but My City goes through certain. When MACO members wanted to expand My City, what happened? Funding gets cut. So our argument is work within the competency that you've been given, do that correctly, and then we can take it from there.
Okay, so the Phase 1 Plus is recently also brought before the provincial parliament the provincial or the People's Bill. It speaks to have an independent Western Cape. And they do this on the base of voter trends of the linguistic communities of the Western Cape, as well as the differences in their view between the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa. What is your view on this bill?
Very good that you've asked me about the Freedom Front's, what's it, Western Cape People's Bill
Yes.
after this one, after the DA, because our analysis as the ANC is that the DA's Provincial Powers Bill is a response to the Freedom Front's Western Cape People's Bill. The Freedom Front, because we are colleagues of Honorable Peter Maree. Peter Maree tables this particular bill first in the House. He engages the Premier on the bill. The DA then, in competition with the Freedom Front, so that the DA can have the upper hand amongst the right-wing vote in the Western Cape, and those who are attracted to the populist language of balkanizing the Cape, then goes and tries to have its provincial powers bill, but wants to come across as more palatable, because there are obviously elements in the DA. The DA knows that they don't want to isolate national government completely. There are elements who want the coalition with the ANC. So they don't want to come and say, no, we want to be separate from South Africa. So in all honesty, the Western Cape People's Bill is actually the honest reflection of what the DA actually wants to do. But it's just the Freedom Front have had the honesty to put it out there and say, no, look, we want to move to a more independent Western Cape. So basically, that's what it's about. So we, of course, if we're opposing the Provincial Powers Bill, we've got a fundamental difference with the Western Cape People's Bill. The Western Cape is part and parcel of South Africa. These trends are not also scientific. We don't have borders between provinces. We are one country. We feel that the bill is extremely divisive. But we do understand also, possibly in terms of the level of frustration from which it comes from, because you find that we have a provincial government that's not necessarily servicing the needs of all our people. And because of that, it's created an African colored divide in the Western Cape. So there's a sense of colored marginalization in the Western Cape, and then that marginalization is then focused on Africans as the enemy. And hence then you get bills like this coming. So we don't necessarily dismiss the underlying sentiment from which this may be coming from, but we think it is misplaced.
Okay, so we're also now seeing that there's an increase in support for both. That's now going to the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, because they recently now released a poll, the third poll since the inception. And the new poll basically shows an increase in support for supporting Cape independence, but also a great amount of support then for a referendum on Cape independence. Now, here's a question I want to ask you. What will happen? Do you think that we might have a referendum when it comes to the 2024 MPE or alongside the MPE in 2024? And what will happen once we have a referendum and there's great support for that? I do know that the referendums aren't binding on government, but what's your view on that particular issue?
Firstly, let me indicate to you that like Cape Independence has done its research, we've also done our research. A substantial amount of right-wingers who are calling for Cape Independence are people who are not even from the Cape. Many of these people are not even from the Cape. Some are even from the UK. Many of them even come from the UK. They are British citizens as well. Then there are those who are coming from other parts of the country, coming here and calling for Cape independence. So even that particular referendum, is it really reflective of those who are born and bred in the Western Cape and in Cape Town in particular? That's going to be problematic. So So we are going to problematize even the holding of a referendum and who gets to take part in that particular referendum. And given also the political environment in the Western Cape, not just that there's an ANC and there's a DA, you're finding a proliferation of political formations in the province. It's not going to be easy because there's alliances that are built, there are various interests, and having a Cape that's independent is not necessarily the priority of the majority of people in the Western Cape in terms of what our view is. But if it does happen, if there is a referendum, it will not be binding, as you say, on government. I also don't think that a government who comes in to power in the Western Cape at the provincial level is even going to entertain it. Even if the DA comes back to power, it's not going to entertain it. Even if you look at the provincial, at the Western Cape People's Bill, and you engage elements of the Freedom Front, they still want to have a link. They look at more as having the Western Cape as a federal state, not necessarily independent. The move is more towards federalism as opposed to independence. So the independence, the Cape independence move, I don't even think, our view as the ANC, we don't even think that there is, maybe on the part of those who fought, those on the ground and who are writing on WhatsApp and putting status, but on the part of the leadership and those who are driving this agenda, we don't think that the intention is to have the Western Cape and Cape Town to be independent. The intention is to push the boundaries. So through pushing the boundaries, you can keep the Western Cape as a outpost where African people are not welcome in this particular province. You can also start pushing the boundaries for national government to start giving the Western Cape more federal powers by calling for independence. Yeah. So that's the strategy, and I think we have unmasked that strategy.
Do you think it's possible for Cape independence to happen?
No, it's completely impossible. It's not going to happen. And I can tell you it's going to be resisted, not only politically, in the legislature, in parliament, or legally, but it's going to be resisted in the streets as well.
Okay. I'm now going to go to the 2019 Manifesto review of the ANC that you're currently busy with. So as I told you, I'm going to focus on 4 of those types of things: economic transformation, social transformation, and then also nation building. And then lastly, only about 3 of the things going to be safer communities, fighting corruption, as well as strengthening governance in public institutions. So on the issue of economic transformation, so we've seen a decrease in the amount of people who are unemployed, but only a very small amount. I think about 0.3% of people are now not anymore unemployed in our country. With the major youth unemployment of 71%. Now, do you then believe that is basically reflective of the current policies implemented by national government, or even the BBBE functions, that is basically now not allowing for more economic output or more people being employed?
No, I think what you've got to understand is that we are, and you've said it, we've actually had a slight increase in terms of employment. We come out of a COVID-19 environment, number one. We are also in the context of a global economic depression, so to speak, where even the major economies globally, such as those in Europe, the US economy, are taking a major beating at the moment. You have the war in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war, that's also impacting on us. I don't think the policies are a problem. I don't think. I'm going to say BBBE is not a cause for unemployment. In fact, BBBE should be a cause for employment, for increase in employment, actually, if implemented correctly. Our own view is that the reason as to why we're finding this is, yes, the context, the global context is there, but also the the manner in which, and here's where we have to be self-critical, we as the ANC, particularly at the national level, have not been efficient enough in terms of implementing even our own policies and having the political will to run through and implement what our policies are. And I think that's part of the problem. So it's also about the quality, and you spoke about that, the quality of the public service. That's where we need to start getting things right. Because, I mean, if you look at the policies, I mean, I look at something which we fought for, because I was leading in the ANC Youth League in the build-up to the 2019 elections. And one of the things that we fought for, which then entered the ANC 2019 manifesto, was that work experience be taken away as a prerequisite for entry-level jobs in the public service. Because that was an impediment. That's about 5 years of experience for you to be a receptionist in a government job. And we pushed for that to be taken away, particularly in terms of youth. And that was taken away. And we've seen the difference. We've seen also, for example, 32 billion has been invested in the presidential employment stimulus. That's a program unique to President Ramaphosa, the presidential employment stimulus. And we found that 1.2 million people have benefited from that, for example. So there have been certain positive gains. Also, the size of our economy has tripled since 1994 as well. We've got to take that into account too. You also look at the short term. So during COVID, you needed certain emergency measures to create employment. For example, teaching assistants. I mean, here in the Western Cape, people still talk about that. So I think there have been certain moves that have been made, but we just feel that the implementation. So even if you look at the issues around cutting red tape around SMMEs and cooperatives, yes, the policies are there, but implementation at the level of lower level bureaucracy also is where the problem lies to a great extent. There needs to be greater consequence management for officials who are not implementing policy correctly.
Okay. On the issue now of the South African Reserve Bank. So the ANC is quite keen on nationalizing that particular bank, right? Can you explain to us why the ANC wants to nationalize? And secondly, also, we also still seeing that white people or white Afrikaner males are still predominantly in control of the economy. So the ANC is quite against this, but it's also been quite slow on actually transforming the financial sector. Can you also add on that particular question as well, or view?
Now, look, so I didn't hear everything, but yes, our adopted policy position is that the Reserve Bank ought to be nationalized, because even if you go to modern democracies, you will find that the Reserve Bank, you cannot have a Reserve Bank that determines fiscal and monetary policy that's under private shareholding. In fact, even foreign private shareholding. There are people who are not even South Africans who are shareholders of the Reserve Bank. What is the level of interest that those people all have in terms of the development of the country? So that is why also you need a Reserve Bank that's going to be able to take a complete mandate from the state, because the state ought to be the driver of economic development. Yes, with the private sector, but driving the private sector. The ANC comes from that particular perspective in that regard, as to why the Reserve Bank ought to be nationalized. But also the ANC understands time and space. Because doesn't mean because we've got the policy for the nationalization of the Reserve Bank that it must happen immediately. We look at the context. We look at the global forces at play. We look at the current state of the economy. We look at the appetite amongst the private sector as well. So it's about ensuring that we have a consensus, bring people on board, and then implement. That's where we are. So we're
Okay.
not necessarily taking the route of the EFF, which says, no, your policy says so, let's do it right now, and then let's face the consequences later. No, no, no. That's not the approach. It's to say, no, let's engage with the private sector. We also understand the language around nationalization sometimes tends to scare away investors as well, and we don't want to do that. We come from a context of COVID as well, and we're also dependent on the World Economic Forum, on the International Monetary Fund as well. They're our partners as well, as South Africa. So we cannot also be irresponsible and just say, no, boom, this is what our policy says, let's implement immediately. Time and space is important.
Okay, so recently there's like news that came out that the ANC's current or government is running out of money. And then we had like where government had a meeting or cabinet had a meeting at Spear in Stellenbosch to find means of trying to address this budgetary shortfall. But then also, we also heard that National Treasury gave government some sort of measures what they can do to relieve the financial pressures. And government said, no, we're going to continue this, but we're going to do this and that. Do you think that the ANC is to blame for the current financial crisis of our country?
Firstly, National Treasury is part of government. And we need to start, and I think part of when I spoke about the issue of implementation policy, we need to start creating a culture as the ANC. One of the issues of the Manifesto review and critical inputs we've been getting from stakeholders is that, and I think we'll move in this direction. We need to start telling National Treasury as well, yes, you've got a role to play, but you are part and parcel of government. Your role as National Treasury is not necessarily to determine the policy of government. It's to find ways in which and advise on how best we can spend resources, where we can save, where we can utilize resources optimally, not to determine, not to get involved on policy issues. And that's the problem. Because then Treasury becomes this institution, kind of like an independent, it's not an independent institution. Treasury is not a Chapter 9 institution. Treasury is part and parcel of the state. So that's number one. Number two, I don't know about the Spear meeting where the funds were raised. I'm not too sure about that. And I want to plead ignorance in that regard. But to say again, as I said at the beginning, to say entirely that the ANC is to blame for the financial crisis we find ourselves is not entirely true. Yes, we must all take responsibility. There have been cases where in which money has not necessarily been spent correctly, invested correctly. But to blame a particular political party and the state entirely for a financial crisis which exists within a particular global context is not entirely fair. So we're not going to say that it's entirely fair that the ANC is responsible for our economic crisis, so to speak. There are various, there's also a private sector in this country, particularly big business, and big business that has benefited for many years from an unbalanced economy, from an apartheid state that favored it. There's big business that many a times just refuses to cooperate. When the state wants to implement progressive policy interventions, which are going to create jobs, but which are going to create jobs in a sustainable manner and not short-term internships, then you have a private sector that refuses to cooperate, that refuses to transform, that goes to court all the time, let alone private sector, NGOs. We've got groups such as, what is this? Liberal groups such as the Helen Suzman Foundation and all of these groups involved in consistently undermining any move that government wants to make around improving the state of the economy. We looked at even the issues around foreign nationals. Now, When you then find that Home Affairs starts taking a tough stance, not to be xenophobic, but to ensure that you have South Africans complaining about job opportunities, to at least ensure that, you know what, foreign nationals must be properly documented. Who takes them to court? Who forces government to spend money in the direction to defend those type of things? It's NGOs like the
But
Helen
sir,
Suzman Foundation.
the issue around foreign nationals, don't you think because we had in COVID, I think our current Minister of Tourism had what's her name? The law. We
Hello.
called it the what do you call it? The hand what you where you hang your things on your clothing hanger, a draad. Like they can't even protect our borders and people just jump over it and come into our country. Don't you think once more the issue around foreign nationals basically in the hands of the ANC? Because you fail to protect our borders. We don't have sufficient border management because people can just walk in here and then do what they want. So the thing once it goes down to accountability, and you just have to accept that you have a role to play in that issue around foreign nationals that are coming into our country without even being documented around that.
No, most certainly. Certainly, we do take responsibility for that. There have been lapses on the borders, but that does not mean that when they are in the country, we should not then be implementing policies to make sure that they are in the country correctly. We cannot say because we are failing in one regard, we cannot put in place another measure to kind of remedy and rescue the situation. So, but I think there has been an improvement over the past few years, I must say. With Minister Motsoaledi in the past few years, there has been an improvement in terms of border control. There have been, and there have been cases of quite a few people being caught trying to enter the country. Who have been caught trying to enter the country illegally, not only on the borders, but even at our ports of entry, even at the airports, for example. So there have been certain improvements, and I think we need to build on that.
The final question on this topic is basically, we now have millions of people just basically dependent on government for national grants to make a living. Should this be celebrated?
Look, I think again, context is very important. So the national grants, you had the context of COVID. You've currently got tough economic conditions. I don't think it should be celebrated, but I think it should be noted as important, and government playing its role and positive role. But it's not something to brag about and say no, because it reflects the unequal state of our society. So it should not necessarily. It should actually be an opportunity for us to sustainably improve the economy, to sustainably ensure that there's greater access of the ordinary person to the economy, and to ensure that they are economically mobile, so they don't depend on grants. But we cannot also say that we must do away with the grants. It's important and it has to be there, and government needs to be commended for at least putting this measure in place at this moment in time, but it's not something that's sustainable, that people should just be relying on. They should be relying on more than just that.
On that particular issue, this month, many of our old people, my grandma included, didn't get their SASSA grants. We then had the minister quickly blamed everything except herself. For example, her hand being directly in that failures of payment of grants to our old people. What's your view on that? We have old people hungry.
Yeah, no, you are completely correct. And in that regard, we cannot defend. Even the ANC nationally issued a statement calling national government and its ministers and employees into order on the issue. There's absolutely no excuse for that. The relevant heads must roll if there's an investigation, and hopefully there's that taking place. That just needs to be sorted out. It is completely unacceptable. We cannot be having a situation where our old people are put in that vulnerable situation, especially the poorest of the poor and the working class. That is completely unacceptable.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic regarding social transformation, nation building, and diversity. So currently, our country is basically more divided than ever before. That the ANC is deliberately trying to divide South Africa in terms of racial lines, specifically when it comes to our economic conditions, because we're seeing that because people are so desperate now in need of food or money, we're seeing that there's more divide or there's more divisiveness in our country than ever before.
No, but the ANC, why would that be put at the doorstep of the ANC? The ANC, in fact, let me firstly say our country was more divided during apartheid. It is a myth to say that the country is now the most divided that it's ever been. We were more divided during apartheid. We were extremely divided during apartheid. It's just that now people are forced to live together and be in one country. Black people are no longer in homelands as they were forced to be in homelands and be in independent, so-called independent states. So it's a myth for us to say that we are more divided. But yes, what is concerning is that there's been a rise, and we spoke the first discussion about provincial powers bill and all of these things feed into that divisiveness. It feeds into a divisiveness of saying, let's have a colored and white Western Cape, but more of a white Western Cape where white people are going to be better towards us than what black people are towards us. Let's just face it, that's the undertone of these type of things. But I don't think to place it at the doorstep of the ANC. The ANC has actually been quite responsible since 1994 up until now in terms of handling the issue of race in this country. Where we can be, say we can, is I would think to some extent, we have not gone far enough in terms of actually implementing transformation and dealing with the legacy of apartheid. Because had we done that quicker, and transformed, as you said earlier, even the financial services sector and things like that, dealt with the land issue, dealt with issues such as District 6, for example, in a much better manner, you would then not be having some of these divisive people being able to play on some of these divides and lack of access. That's this. I wouldn't say that the ANC is responsible. It's by time that we implement proper transformation in this country. And it's ironic, whenever we talk transformation, we are then accused of saying, no, we are dividing people. No, transformation ought to lead to unity. Because you are going to continuously have a frustration on the part of the majority of people in this country if their lives do not change for the better. And if the impediments that are in place are not removed. So things such as BBBE, for example, actually ought to facilitate the building of a united South Africa and not necessarily be seen as something divisive.
On the issue of, once more, of the divide between our people, I am a proud color South African. I'm a proud Khoi, because of what our people has been through, and I'm really proud to be a colored. But the issue I find, and I think many colored people experience this, is we don't get the same opportunities as our black counterparts might. We have to sort of struggle to get into places, get decent jobs. I am my own, and I struggle to get in contact with national government to assist me with developing projects for our community, with implementing programs that can lead to decreasing crime, decreasing whatever we need in our community. And all three governments here, national, provincial, and local, is failing our colored communities in terms of that. Is the ANC deliberately trying to, or governments deliberately trying to marginalize our colored, Khoi, and San communities?
Firstly, let me indicate that in terms of the definition of black in South Africa, Africans and coloreds are considered black, part of the broadest sense of black. I don't think there's a deliberate attempt on the part on the part of government, because if I have this conversation, this is the same conversation I The same sentiment I pick up when I go to Khalid, for example. There's also a feeling of marginalization on the part of African young people to say that, no, you know what, we are just not taken seriously. We're not recognized. So, and our argument is to say, instead of us turning this into a colored and African issue, let us turn this into an issue of African colored solidarity, because I think that the struggles are the same. The frustrations are the same. It's the perception that's created that no, your African counterparts are being favored. They're going through the same frustrations. In fact, if you look at even in terms of the apartheid context, Africans had to even be in homelands, given inferior services as well. But I would not say that. What you will find happening is sometimes, because people want to appear at the surface level that they are BEE compliant, they go and put an African CEO or an African director. But ordinary African young people on the street who are running small businesses are not benefiting necessarily. So I wouldn't reduce it to an issue of Africans being favored above colored, but I would indicate that it speaks to basically inefficiency, an inefficiency that needs to be addressed, but also a lack of sensitivity, towards the need for proper transformation, but also the lack of solidarity. I think that's what's lacking here. We have not yet been able to ensure that our struggles are viewed as common struggles and stand together and help each other in those struggles.
Okay.
And I think that's where, and I will take responsibility, that's where our political formations have failed us. Instead, sometimes we try to use the divide to gain cheap party political points, and that's not the role of the ANC. The ANC have not, if you look at in the Western Cape, we have not gone and said, no, colored people are getting this, why are black people not getting that, no, this, that. But let's try to bring our people together. I think that's important.
Yeah, around the issue, I can debate all day around the divide within color communities, but I will not go there now. Okay, so the last 3 points goes around safer communities. We are not safer from 2019.
No.
Corruption, billions of rands are being stolen in the hands of agencies. There's no accountability from your side. Mkhize, during COVID-19, was involved with digital vibes. He's still a senior member of the ANC. There's nothing happening. Look at the spokesperson of the ANC. Back within the ANC ranks, nothing is happening there. Strengthening of governance in public institutions. I think you can speak more about it.
Look, let me firstly indicate that we don't justify corruption, but we have got the rule of law in this country. We've got what is known as rule of law and due process. As far as we are concerned, William Mkhize has not been found guilty in a court of law of corruption. As the ANC, what we do have is a step-aside rule. If you are charged, if there's sufficient evidence and you've been charged, not even been found guilty, but you've been criminally charged and you're appearing in court, you step aside and you don't hold any position of public office. And that we have here in our province. We've got MPLs who are my colleagues, Andile Lily and Danville Smith, who are currently sitting at home, for example. We, as the PEC of the ANC, have just placed one of our leaders last week on step aside also. So we found our former Secretary General facing a similar situation. Heads have been rolling, yes, because of the nature of our constitutional democracy and the rule of law that we have. You have to go through a process. You have to follow a process. When that process is concluded, then basically action is taken. So we cannot have a gun-ho approach. The same could have been said about Lorna Gross, for example, in the city of Cape Town. The DA councillor implicated, charged, the Hawks investigation, there's that people wanted her out, but no, look now, she's been cleared. So I think we have to take those factors into account as well. But yes, there is a perception out there, and a rightful perception, yes, that there have been far too many cases of corruption that have that we've not been necessarily firm enough, or at least they've been allowed to take place. And that's when I spoke to you about the nature of the public service. We need to really tighten up the public service. We need to tighten it up, and there needs to be greater consequence management. Fully agreed in that regard. But to say that, but I think it also speaks to our society as well. We've become, unfortunately, to a great extent, a lawless society. And that's also very, very concerning. And we as politicians ought to lead by example.
On the issue of safer communities and strengthening governance in public institutions?
No, look, in terms of safer communities, I think we need to, and I think part of the manifesto, that's why we have a manifesto review, where people are giving their inputs. We need to ensure that we get SAPs right. We need to make sure that there's greater incentives for quality. Not to say we don't have good police officers, but for quality personnel in the police services, right? And that's what we have been working on. But also empower communities more. And I think here in the Western Cape, we want to also push for that, but nationally as well. Greater mechanism needs to be put in place, which empowers communities to actually be partners of law enforcement in building safer communities. Because once communities are part of that process, the communities then take ownership. Communities know many of these criminals. Communities are ears and eyes, but also communities start building a culture and an ethos that says no to crime. You don't then find the auntie or the uncle or the grandmother hiding the gangster when law enforcement wants to come and catch a gangster, for example, because you've made the communities, you've incentivized them, you know. And I think it's interlinked again with improving the socio-economic conditions. You are not going to tackle crime sufficiently and build safer communities up until you improve the socio-economic conditions of our people, particularly our young people.
Definitely. Okay. The last topic, I hope get this in before load shedding hits us.
We've got 1 minute before load shedding.
And there's about 4 questions still. Now, the Western Cape is not the only province that is not governed by the ANC. Do you think that 2024 will be your chance to change that and have a 9 country power? Or 9 province power?
Look, firstly, we don't enter an election not to win the election. So we are entering this particular election campaign because we want to govern the Western Cape. What we have seen in terms of the trends, if you look at the 2016 local government elections, the DA have gone below 50% in the majority of municipalities in the Western Cape. 2019, they declined from 2014, for example, at the provincial level. So the DA is in decline in the Western Cape. The DA are losing partners in the Western Cape. There's a greater sense of disenfranchisement because of the sins of incumbency. There's an opportunity for the ANC to regain lost support. But in order for that to happen, we need to ensure, number one, that at the national level, we as the Western Cape, particularly as a leadership in the West, it's in our best interest to raise the kind of questions that you've been raising with me now, for us to raise those questions in the National Executive Committee with our national colleagues, because we need to make sure that the ANC image and delivery at the national level improves, because that then influences voter perceptions here in the Western Cape. No matter how much the DA is failing and how we're holding them accountable and presenting our alternatives, people are still going to say, no, but at national level, this is what you are doing, this is what you are not doing. So we need to make sure that we coalesce with other provincial leaders, we drive that particular change at that level. But beyond that also, I think it's about ensuring that we hold the DA accountable bring delivery where we can, even as an opposition. And I think we've been able to do that. So I think let me say that there's an opportunity for the ANC to improve from where it was, and there's also an increased opportunity for the DA to be out of government in the Western Cape.
Okay. If you win the province, what will be your #1 priority for the people of the Western Cape?
The #1 priority right now, given the current circumstances, is to ensure that we build safer communities. I think that's important, and that communities are part and parcel and brought on board in that process of building safer communities. And then that goes hand in hand and is tied to issues of the economy, and also to resolve some of the energy issues here in the province. I think working closely with National to ensure that the energy crisis is resolved, but building safer communities in the immediate is the priority. But as I say, building safer communities is not in isolation from ensuring that our people have got greater access to the economy, that we're building non-racialism, that we're creating opportunities, but essentially the immediate, let's keep our people safe.
Okay. So many scholars and political analysts are now suggesting the ANC will drop below 50% during the during 2024 ME nationally. Below 24. I don't believe that. I believe you might 50, but not below 50. Not for now. Maybe the next MPE. What's your view on that? And also part of the question is blaming apartheid for everything. Part of the ANC's campaign or electoral campaign for the 2024 MPE.
Look, firstly, let me say that any political strategist is not going to reveal his or her party's political campaign in the media. But I will say to you that that's not part of the campaign. That would be a very stupid way of campaigning, just to blame apartheid and say. But to honestly reflect on the legacy of apartheid is important. The apartheid legacy still lives on. The one thing that the Manifesto review process has shown is that people generally still feel that despite the mistakes we have made, despite the fact that we have not operated optimally, there's still a hope in the African National Congress, generally in the country. So I don't think we'll go below 50, but still, we should not rest on our laurels. We need to ensure that we make good on our promises, and that's important. But also, in terms of the provincial politics, what we are saying is noticed more and more of a trend away from the DA for various reasons, not necessarily a trend towards the ANC, so to speak, everywhere, but a trend towards the DA. But in rural areas, if you look at, for example, we've had a by-election in Barrydale, for example, which is a hostile area to the ANC. And let me say, colored rural areas, the ANC has been improving in terms of its electoral performance. And that's a very, very significant point that has to be taken note of. So let's see what happens, but we in it to win it.
Okay, so around the BRICS format, do you think that South Africa, is there anything positive coming out of BRICS for the people of South Africa in terms of bettering our social lives?
No, most certainly. I think, look, you must remember that socio-economic development in countries is often dependent on what is happening globally. Now, BRICS has the potential to ensure that to some extent we are insulated from some of the demands which Western powers and Western economies want to have on us and want to impose on us in terms of our economic policies. So the BRICS arrangement and the strengthening of BRICS, in our view, is going to make it, particularly from an ANC perspective, it's going to make it a little bit easier for us to implement some of the transformational and more progressive socio-economic policies, which you may be getting pushback from via bodies globally, which are Western aligned. So that's number one. Number two, just in terms of the access that the South African markets are going to be having to economies such as India, such as China, such as Saudi Arabia now in this part and parcel, such as the UAE, most certainly we'll be able to have greater access. And that greater access means greater potential for job creation here in South Africa, greater potential for some of our small and medium enterprises to grow. But what's going to be important is how we move along. We must not be passengers. We must not be just those who are happy to be part of this whole thing and move along. No, no, no. We must also make demands consistently, and that's going to be important. So the formation can assist us, but it can also, unfortunately, put us into a lull and frenzy of saying, no, we're part of this nice BRICS thing now, these big economies, and automatically everything's going to happen. No, it can actually become sometimes an impediment if we do not use it correctly.
We're also seeing now a greater trend going towards coalition governments. Is the ANC preparing themselves for having a coalition government come 2024?
Look, if we are saying that we're in it to win it, then we would not necessarily be preparing for that as if it's going to happen. But we understand the political environment. Anything can happen. So we are ready for that if that does happen. In fact, even in 1994, when we governed the country with over 50%, we were in a coalition at the beginning. We had the National Party, we had the Inkatha Freedom Party. Us in the Western, when it's good you're asking, because in the Western Cape, we have always had, in fact, National started to look at local government coalition model from us here. The ANC in many parts of the Western Cape were the first to govern through successful coalitions. We even governed the Western Cape in I think it was 2002, during the term of the DA, when the NNP then left, when the NP left and formed the NNP. It was the NNP and the ANC together. So we are sensitive to the fact that the need may arise, and we're ready for that. And it's about give and take. It's not about holding hard and fast on certain things and saying, no, there's no. It's about compromise, but ensuring coalition, not for the sake of holding on power, but to better serve the people.
We are seeing that less young people are participating in elections. I spoke to the IEC a couple of weeks ago around this issue of lack of youth participation. What is the ANC doing, even as a party and as government, to ensure we have greater participation of young people within voting, even within the political space as well?
No, I think one of the big things that we did start doing was, if we look at 2019 and 2021, is to actively show that we are pushing for more younger public representatives on our lists. And that, we believe, it does have the potential to attract more young people to be politically active. Not even to vote for us necessarily, but to say, no, you know what? Younger people are taken more seriously. Also to ensure that we can show that policies which speak to young people are being implemented and the voice of young people is being heard. And I think also what we need to do and what we are doing is to indicate to the younger voting public that, look, we want to move away from the petty squabbles, because that frustrates young people. They say, no, you are all just arguing, playing. We're not dealing with real issues here. And that's important. We need to start moving in that. Let's get to practical issues. Let's get back to basics. And that's going to be the best way to attract our young people to the polls.
Will we see you as president for 2029 for the ANC?
That's too early to tell. Let's ensure that we play our role in the province. Let's look at 2024 in the province, and then we take it from there.
Okay. So around accountability, Now, I've talked to my struggles to get hold of provincial government and even local government. I have my own NPO. I want to develop and help our community now. How do the public get hold of public representatives within government to aid us with this? I emailed the Minister of Social Development, Fernandez, the Premier of the Western Cape, Premier Windy. No one gives a damn about the concerns of our residents. How do we get hold of these public servants?
Now, see, that is why it's very important. I think maybe another program you should be having is to zone in on legislatures and parliament, because remember, these guys who you've spoken about now are in the executive.
Mm.
They are leading government. Now, when you have situations that they are uncontactable and non-responsive, those issues then need to be raised with the public representatives who are paid by the public to hold them accountable. So people such as ourselves, even people in the DA who are not MECs, but who are
Yes.
chairs of standing committees. So when the Premier is AWOL, you contact, I give you a name, you contact someone like Christopher Fry, who is the chairperson of the Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Development in the Western Cape. You contact Cameron Dugmore as the leader of the opposition, or those who are there, Peter Marais, who sits there. And you say, listen, I can't get a hold of the person you must hold accountable. These are the issues. Please raise it. Please indicate that you must get back to me. Raise it in the committee. Make a noise in the house. That's what I do. If my minister, and I'm in the education space, when the public cannot get hold of MEC mainly on issues of education, I wait, I raise it, I write, then I wait until there's a Thursday and we have a sitting and the media are there, and I stand up and I read the letter. I say, this person this time tried to call the MEC. He wanted this, they were unsuccessful. MEC, please deal with it. Then immediately the MEC's office will write to me as the MPL and say, no, please just pass on the details. Oh, yeah, they're getting back. Because politicians don't like to be embarrassed publicly. And that's the mechanism the public has. Hold politicians accountable through public representatives. Go to the constituency office closest by where you are. Say this particular, they have not responded. This is what we require. So also, it's about also ensuring, and I think media and community media has an important role to play. Let's ensure that our people also understand how government works, but also how accountability works, how accountability works, and what's the role of a public representative.
Do you have any parting words as we end off this interview, sir?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think my message to people is to say that that let's ensure that we participate at all levels in this electoral process, but participate in a way in which we're able to contribute to the manifestos of the various political parties by engaging them thoroughly based on the needs of the people, but also contribute critically to the kind of public representatives that political parties put up on their lists, because that in the end are going to sit with that for the next 4 years, regardless as to whether we support or oppose a political party. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming, sir. Have a blessed day and best of luck with your endeavors as you move over to 2024.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Let's be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.